The coffin was already sealed. White roses covered every inch of it. Billionaires, politicians, and cameras stood in silence as prayers echoed across the cemetery. Then it happened. A trembling voice shattered the air. "He's still alive," all heads turned. Aissatou Cissé. The maid stood frozen in the aisle, her eyes wide with terror and certainty. Guards rushed toward her. The family gasped. Some laughed. Others were furious. How dare she remove her? But Aissatou didn't move. She kept staring at the coffin, as if something inside was staring back. Before we go any further, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you believe powerful secrets always come to light, make sure to subscribe because this story is just beginning. Long before the white roses, the cameras and the sealed coffin life inside the Sidab mansion followed a quiet, brutal rhythm. Every morning before sunrise, Aissatou Cissé was already awake. She moved through the massive house barefoot, careful not to let her steps echo on the polished marble floors. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking Lagos, tall gates separating it from the noise and dust of the city below. From the outside, it looked like power and perfection. From the inside, it felt cold. Aissatou room was a narrow space behind the kitchen, barely wide enough for a bed and a wooden box where she kept her clothes. No mirror, no window, just a small bulb hanging from the ceiling. She never complained. Complaining, she had learned, only made people notice you, and being noticed was dangerous. She worked silently, cleaning, cooking, washing, listening. Most days she was treated as if she didn't exist. "Mariama doesn't like the soup too hot," the cook would snap, even though Aissatou hadn't touched the stove. "Move," one of the guests would say, waving a hand, eyes never meeting hers. "Don't stand there," Mr. Joseph Mensah, the head butler, would whisper sharply. "You're blocking the view." Aissatou always stepped aside, but Khalifa Sidibe noticed her. Not in the way powerful men noticed women, not with desire or ownership. He noticed her the way a man notices silence, because it was rare in a house filled with noise. Khalifa was already in his mid-50s, then tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding, even when he said nothing. His voice was calm, measured, and when he spoke, people listened. Staff froze. Business partners leaned forward. His family smiled too quickly. From his study, Khalifa often watched the household through the open doors. He saw how people treated one another when they thought he wasn't looking. He saw how Mariama Sidibe ruled the house with sharp words and perfect posture. She wore elegance like armor, always dressed, always composed, always superior. "A maid should not look people in the eye," Mariama once said. During breakfast, her voice light, almost amused. "It makes them forget their place." Aissatou lowered her gaze immediately, but Khalifa lifted his. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The room shifted just slightly. Mariama smiled and continued eating. Their son Ibrahim Sidibe rarely came home anymore. When he did, he carried himself like someone already bored with inheritance, already impatient for power. He spoke loudly on the phone, often about deals Khalifa didn't remember approving. "Don't worry," Ibrahim once said, laughing as he passed the study door. Once the old man steps aside, everything moves faster. Khalifa had paused his reading then. Aissatou had been polishing a table nearby. Her hands froze for a fraction of a second. She hadn't meant to hear. But she had. That was the thing about Aissatou. She heard everything, not because she was curious, but because people forgot she was there. One evening, as rain fell heavily against the tall glass windows, Khalifa sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet. Mariama was at a charity gala. Ibrahim was out with friends. Zainab, the youngest, was locked in her room, scrolling endlessly on her phone, trying not to think. Aissatou entered with a tray of tea. She placed it down carefully, her hands steady. "Thank you," Khalifa said. She stopped, looked up surprised. He met her eyes not with command but with recognition. "You may sit," he added, gesturing to a chair nearby. Aissatou hesitated. No one had ever told her to sit in that room. "Yes, sir," she whispered, but remained standing. Khalifa smiled faintly. "As you wish." There was a long silence. Rain drummed on the glass. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. "You're not from Lagos," Khalifa said finally. "No, sir. Senegal." She nodded. "Yes, sir. St. Louis. Why did you come here?" The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't a test. It was genuine. Aissatou swallowed. "To work. To survive." Khalifa nodded slowly. "That is the most honest answer anyone has given me today." She didn't know how to respond, so she said nothing. From that night on, Khalifa began to watch more closely. He noticed how Aisatu brought him his medication without being reminded, how she adjusted his pillows when he coughed even before he asked, how she stayed awake late when his insomnia kept him pacing the halls. He also noticed how his family behaved when they thought he was weak. Mariama's concern became loud and theatrical. "You work too hard," she would say, loud enough for visitors to hear. "You must rest for all of us." But when the doors closed, her voice changed. "You should start putting things in order," she said one night, her tone flat. "The company. The accounts, just in case." Ibrahim's visits became more frequent, his questions more specific. "Which properties are still under your name? Have you updated the will who has signing authority now?" Khalifa answered calmly. He always did. And Aisatu listened. One afternoon while cleaning near the study, she heard raised voices. She stopped, cloth in hand, heart pounding. "You promised me," Ibrahim said sharply. "I promised nothing," Mariama replied. "If he finds out, he won't. He's tired, he's sick, and he trusts us." There was a pause. Then laughter. Quiet, dangerous. Aisatu stepped back silently, her chest tight. That night, Khalifa collapsed. Doctors came. Sirens pierced the air, the house filled with chaos. Mariama cried loudly. Ibrahim shouted instructions. Zainab stood shaking in the corner. Aisatu held Khalifa's hand as they wheeled him away. He squeezed her fingers weakly. And in that moment, as his eyes met hers, she saw something deeper than pain. She saw decision. Later in the hospital, after the others had gone home, Khalifa opened his eyes. Aisatu was there. "You stayed," he murmured. "Yes, sir." He studied her face as if weighing something heavy. "Aisatu," he said quietly, "if I disappear, will you tell the truth?" Her breath caught. "I don't understand, sir." He closed his eyes. "You will." Outside the room, unseen, Mariama stood listening. And far away, the first stone of a very dangerous plan was already being set in place. Khalifa Sidibe had built his empire on one simple rule: nothing lasts forever unless it is protected. Lying in the hospital bed, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, he realized he had protected his company far better than he had protected his family. The doctors said his collapse was due to exhaustion, stress, age, too many years carrying weight alone. They spoke gently, respectfully, as men always did when addressing someone of Khalifa's stature. But Khalifa heard what they didn't say. "You are no longer untouchable." When he returned home a week later, the Sidibe mansion welcomed him with rehearsed relief. Mariama rushed to his side, her face tight with concern. "You scared us," she said loud enough for the staff to hear. "You must slow down now. We can handle things." Ibrahim stood a little behind her arms, cross-nodding. "The board agrees, Father. You've earned your rest." Khalifa smiled faintly. "Have I?" No one answered that. From that day on, things began to change subtly at first. Meetings were scheduled without him. Documents arrived already signed. Decisions were presented as final, not proposals. When Khalifa questioned them, Ibrahim responded quickly, smoothly. It was urgent, he would say. "You were sleeping," Mariama supported him. "You told us to help," she reminded Khalifa. "We're just following your wishes." Khalifa said nothing. He didn't argue, he simply watched. And Aisatu listened. She noticed how Ibrahim spent hours locked in the study late at night, his voice low on the phone. How Mariama suddenly developed a deep interest in bank statements she had never touched before. How strangers, lawyers, consultants, men with briefcases and quick smiles began to appear more often. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway outside the study, Aisatu heard Ibrahim's voice rise. "You said the offshore account was clean," it is another man replied. "But if your father audits, he won't." Ibrahim snapped. "He's barely holding on." Aisatu's heart pounded. She leaned closer, barely breathing. Mariama's voice cut in calm and cold. "Just move the funds before the next quarter. Once everything is transferred, it won't matter." There was a pause. "And the will?" the man asked. Mariama laughed softly. "Leave that to me." Aisatu stepped back as footsteps approached. She lowered her head just in time as the door opened and Ibrahim walked out, his expression hard. He didn't see her, or he didn't care. That night Aisatu couldn't sleep. She lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she had heard. She knew what it meant. Even if she didn't understand the numbers or the laws, she understood betrayal. She had seen it before back home when relatives smiled while dividing land that didn't belong to them yet. The next morning she found Khalifa alone in the garden. He sat beneath the old mango tree wrapped in a light blanket, his eyes closed. The air smelled of earth and leaves. Lagos traffic hummed faintly beyond the walls. She hesitated. Then she spoke. "Sir, may I say something?" Khalifa opened his eyes slowly. "You already have." She swallowed. "I hear things. I don't mean to, but people speak freely when they think I am invisible." A long silence followed. "Go on," Khalifa said quietly. Aissatou told him everything. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just plainly. Voices, names, words like transfer accounts will. She didn't accuse, she didn't interpret, she simply repeated what she had heard. When she finished, her hands were shaking. Khalifa did not react immediately. He stared at the mango tree for a long time, as if counting the leaves. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but something in it had hardened. "Thank you," he said. "That is all, yes." Aissatou frowned. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Khalifa replied. "You prevented it." She didn't understand, but she nodded and left. That afternoon, Khalifa made 2 phone calls. The first was to Barrister Kunle Adebayo. "I need a full audit," Khalifa said, quietly. "No alerts, no warnings." Kunle hesitated. "Sir, if what you're implying is true," "It is," Khalifa said simply, "and I need to know how deep it goes." The second call was to Dr. Sadiq Lawal. "I may need your discretion," Khalifa told him, "not as a doctor, as a man." Dr. Lawal paused. "That depends on what you're asking. I'm asking whether you believe people reveal their true nature when they think death is near." There was a silence on the line. "Yes," Dr. Lawal said finally, "I do." That night, Khalifa pretended to sleep. From his bedroom, he heard Mariama and Ibrahim talking in the hallway. Their voices were low, urgent. "He knows something," Ibrahim said. "You're paranoid," Mariama replied. "He's been asking questions." So what if he changes the will?" "He won't," Mariama said sharply. "He's tired, and soon he won't be a problem at all." Khalifa closed his eyes. Not in fear, in clarity. Over the next few weeks, the truth surfaced piece by piece. Accounts drained, properties quietly transferred, contracts signed with forged authorization. It was all there, documented, undeniable. Kunle brought the files in a plain folder, his face grim. "If this goes public," the lawyer said, "your son could face prison. Your wife, disgrace." Khalifa nodded. "And if I confront them now, they'll deny everything and destroy what evidence remains." Khalifa leaned back slowly. "No," he said, "I won't confront them." Kunle frowned. "Then what will you do?" Khalifa's eyes drifted toward the window, toward the servants' quarters where Aissatou was hanging laundry in the sun. "I will give them exactly what they want," Khalifa said, "and watch what they do with it." Kunle understood immediately. His breath caught. "You mean, yes, that's dangerous. So is betrayal." A few days later, Khalifa collapsed again. This time it was worse. Sirens, doctors, panic. Mariama screamed. Ibrahim shouted orders. Zainab cried uncontrollably. Aissatou stood frozen at the doorway, her heart pounding. At the hospital, Khalifa was rushed into intensive care. Dr. Sadiq Lawal personally oversaw everything. Visitors were restricted, information tightly controlled. When Mariama demanded answers, the doctor shook his head gravely. "It's serious," he said. "Prepare yourselves." That night, as rain lashed against the hospital windows, Khalifa opened his eyes. Aissatou was there. She always was. He reached for her hand. "It has begun," he whispered. Her eyes filled with tears. "Sir, what is happening?" He looked at her with surprising gentleness. "I'm going to disappear," he said, "and when I do, the truth will come out." Aissatou shook her head. "No, please, don't say that." Khalifa smiled faintly. "Listen to me. Whatever happens next, do not doubt what you know." She wanted to ask more, to stop him, to beg, but the door opened. Mariama walked in, her face carefully arranged into grief. Khalifa closed his eyes, and the plan moved one step closer to a coffin covered in white roses. From the moment Khalifa Sidibe was admitted into intensive care for the second time, the atmosphere around him changed. This was no longer concern. This was anticipation. Machines breathed for him. Tubes ran from his arms. Curtains were drawn halfway, keeping the room dim and heavy. Nurses spoke in hushed tones. Doctors avoided promises. Every hour felt fragile, borrowed. Mariama Sidibe made sure everyone saw her devotion. She arrived early every morning dressed in black or soft gray, her face bare of makeup. She held Khalifa's hand when visitors were present. She wept openly in the corridor. She spoke to journalists in trembling sentences. "My husband is a strong man," she said, her voice breaking at the right moments. "But only God knows his plans." People praised her. A devoted wife, a woman of faith, so strong. But when the doors closed and the cameras were gone, Mariama's tears dried instantly. She checked her phone. She whispered sharply to Ibrahim. She argued with doctors about access, not treatment. "How long can this go on?" she asked Dr. Sadiq Lawal one evening. Her tone clipped. "We are doing everything possible," the doctor replied carefully. "That's not what I asked," Mariama said. "I asked how long." Dr. Lawal held her gaze. "As long as life remains." Mariama turned away annoyed. Ibrahim, meanwhile, had already shifted into command mode. He spoke to staff as if the house already belonged to him. He instructed drivers. He demanded files from the company office. He referred to decisions as mine instead of ours. When Khalifa's name came up, Ibrahim avoided it. "Father needs rest," he would say. "We can't burden him with details." Zainab hovered in the background silent. She slept poorly. She cried at night. She wanted to believe her mother's performance, but something in her stomach twisted every time Ibrahim smiled. And Aissatou Cissé watched it all. She was there when Khalifa groaned softly in his sleep. She was there when the nurses grew tired and impatient. She was there when no one else wanted to be. Sometimes she spoke to him, even when he didn't respond. "I washed your coat today," she whispered once, adjusting his blanket. "The one you like. It still smells like your cologne." She told him about small things, the mango tree, the weather, the stray cat that kept sneaking into the kitchen. She didn't know if he could hear her. But she spoke anyway. One night, long after visiting hours had ended, Aissatou sat beside Khalifa's bed holding his hand. The room was quiet except for the machines. Suddenly his fingers tightened around hers. Her breath caught. "Sir," she whispered. His eyes fluttered open. "Aissatou," he murmured. His voice was weak but clear. Tears rushed to her eyes. "You're awake, thank God." He looked at her for a long moment, as if memorizing her face. "They think I'm dying," he said softly. She nodded, unable to speak. "That makes people honest," Khalifa continued. "Or cruel." He paused to breathe. "Tell me," he said, "who has been here?" She hesitated. Then she told the truth. "Madame Mariama comes when there are visitors," Aissatou said quietly. "Ibrahim comes to ask questions. Miss Zainab comes to cry." Khalifa closed his eyes briefly. "And when they think I cannot hear," he asked. Aissatou swallowed hard. "They talk about the company, about money, about what happens next." Khalifa nodded slowly. There was no surprise in his expression, only confirmation. "I am not afraid of death," he said. "I'm afraid of leaving lies behind." Aissatou shook her head. "You will recover, sir." He looked at her gently. "Maybe. Maybe not." She didn't want to hear this. She squeezed his hand. Outside the room, unseen, Mariama stood listening. Her face hardened. The next morning, Mariama made a decision. She called a family meeting in the hospital waiting room. Ibrahim arrived first, confident. Zainab followed, nervous and pale. "The doctor says it's time we prepare." "Mariama," announced, her voice solemn. "We can't pretend forever." Ibrahim nodded. "We need to secure everything now." Zainab looked between them. "But father is still alive." Mariama turned sharply. "Barely." Zainab flinched. "That's not how you talk about him," she whispered. Mariama sighed dramatically. "You're too emotional. This is business." Ibrahim leaned forward. "If he wakes up and changes anything, we lose control." Mariama met his eyes. "He won't." "How can you be sure?" Zainab asked. Mariama smiled, a thin, unsettling smile. "Because even if he wakes up, he's already too weak." Zainab's heart sank. Later that day, Ibrahim tried to enter Khalifa's room alone. Dr. Sadiq blocked the doorway. "Visiting hours are over. I'm his son," Ibrahim snapped. "And I'm his doctor," Dr. Sadiq replied calmly. "And right now he needs rest." Ibrahim stared at him, suspicion flashing in his eyes. From inside the room, Khalifa heard raised voices. He smiled faintly. That night, Khalifa asked Dr. Sadiq for privacy. "A final conversation," he said. Aissatou remained. Dr. Sadiq stayed near the door. "This is the moment," Khalifa said quietly when they were alone. "If we wait longer, they will finish what they started." Dr. Sadiq nodded. "Are you certain?" "Yes." Aissatou's heart raced. "Sir, what does this mean?" Khalifa turned to her. It means, he said gently, that tomorrow the world will believe I'm gone. Her eyes widened in horror. No. You must trust me, he said. Even when it hurts. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. I can't. You already are, Khalifa replied softly. By telling the truth, by staying. He turned to Dr. Siddiq. Proceed. The doctor took a deep breath. Once this begins, there is no turning back. Khalifa nodded. The following morning, chaos erupted. Doctors rushed in. Alarms sounded. Nurses shouted instructions. Curtains were drawn. Security cleared the hallway. Mariama collapsed dramatically outside the room. Ibrahim clenched his fists, pretending shock. Zainab sobbed uncontrollably. Isa too stood frozen, her body trembling. Hours later, Dr. Siddiq emerged slowly. He removed his gloves. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Khalifa Siddiq has passed. Mariama screamed. Ibrahim bowed his head. Zainab fell to her knees, and Isatu felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Inside the room, unseen by anyone else, Khalifa Sidibe lay perfectly still, alive and watching. Death arrived at the Sidibe mansion before the body did. By nightfall, the house was filled with whispers, phone calls, and carefully controlled grief. The gates opened and closed without pause. Black cars lined the driveway. Neighbors sent condolences. Business partners requested meetings. Pastors called. Politicians sent statements. Mariama Sidibe took charge of everything. She moved through the mansion in flowing black dresses, her face calm, her voice steady. She instructed staff, answered calls, and corrected anyone who spoke too softly or too loudly. This must be done properly, she said again and again. Properly did not mean honestly. Properly meant beautifully. In the private living room, Ibrahim poured himself a drink. He didn't hide his impatience. How long before the will is read, he asked. Mariama lowered her voice. Soon enough. Kunle will handle it. Ibrahim frowned. Why hasn't he called yet? He will, Mariama said. Relax. Zainab sat on the edge of a chair, hugging herself. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice barely audible. I want to see him, she whispered. Just once. Mariama turned sharply. No, Zainab flinched. Why not? Because it's not necessary, Mariama replied. And because it will only make things harder, for who Zainab asked. Mariama didn't answer. Across the house in a corner no one bothered to check. Aissatou Cissé sat on the floor of her small room, staring at the wall. She hadn't cried yet. The shock had frozen everything inside her. The sounds of mourning felt distant, unreal, like noise from another world. Only one sentence echoed in her mind. Khalifa Sidibe has passed. She pressed her palms together, whispering a prayer in a language she hadn't spoken aloud in years. If this is true, give him peace. If it is not, give me strength. She didn't know why that second thought came. She only knew it wouldn't leave her. That evening, Mr. Akatotuke. Joseph Mensah knocked on her door. Pack your things, he said flatly. Issatou looked up. Sir. You heard me, he replied. Madam says your services are no longer required. Her heart dropped. I haven't done anything wrong. This is not a discussion, Mensah said. You will be given 1 week's pay. Be grateful. Issatou stood slowly. May I at least attend the funeral? Mensah scoffed. This is a family affair. She nodded. Yes, sir. When the door closed, her knees buckled. She sat back down, clutching her chest. Khalifa had always protected her from small humiliations, from unfair punishments, from sudden dismissal. Without him, the house had already turned hostile. Late that night, a black van arrived quietly at the hospital. No sirens, no ceremony. Inside, Dr. Sadiq Lawal supervised the transfer with careful precision. Paperwork had been signed. Procedures followed. Official time of death recorded. To the world, everything was legal. Inside the van, behind layers of sheets and silence, Khalifa Sidibe opened his eyes. The darkness didn't frighten him. It clarified everything. The air smelled different, cold, metallic. He could feel the movement of the vehicle beneath him, steady and controlled. His heart beat calmly. His mind was sharp. So this is how it feels, he thought, to be invisible. Hours later, he was moved again, this time into a private facility far from the city. No name on the door, no visitors allowed. Only 2 people knew where he was. Dr. Sadiq, Barrister Kunle. Kunle arrived just before dawn, his face pale. It's worse than we thought, he said once they were alone. Khalifa sat up slowly. Tell me, they've already begun transferring assets, Kunli said. Ibrahim has accessed accounts he shouldn't even know exist. Mariama is preparing public statements about restructuring the company. Khalifa nodded, and the staff, divided, Kunli replied. Some are afraid. Some are eager to please the new power. Khalifa closed his eyes briefly. As expected. Kunli hesitated. There is one thing, what the maid, Kunli said. Aissatou Cissé. Khalifa opened his eyes immediately. What about her? They're dismissing her, Kunli said, effective immediately. A shadow crossed Khalifa's face. She must not be harmed. She won't be, Kunli assured him, but she'll be vulnerable. Khalifa leaned back, exhaling slowly. Everything happens faster when people think you're dead. In the days that followed, preparations for the funeral intensified. Mariama spared no expense. Imported flowers, luxury tents, live broadcast arrangements, invitations sent to everyone who mattered and many who didn't. This must reflect his legacy, she told the event planners. He was a great man. Behind closed doors, she said something else entirely. After this, she told Ibrahim, we move forward, no more delays. Ibrahim grinned. Finally. Zainab watched them from across the room, feeling like a stranger in her own family. She sought out Aissatou that night. The maid's room was nearly empty. A suitcase lay open on the bed. You're leaving? Zainab asked quietly. Aissatou nodded. They asked me to. Zainab's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Aissatou offered a small, tired smile. It's not your fault. Zainab hesitated. You were the only one who stayed with him. Aissatou's eyes filled with tears for the first time. He was kind to me. Zainab nodded slowly. He was different with you. They stood in silence for a moment. Will you come to the funeral? Zainab asked. Aissatou didn't answer right away. I don't know if I belong there, she said finally. Zainab shook her head. You do. The night before the funeral, rain fell heavily over Lagos. In a quiet room far away, Khalifa Sidibé stood by a window watching the storm. Tomorrow he would be buried. Tomorrow the world would praise him, mourn him, and move on without him. Tomorrow his family would reveal who they truly were. He turned to Dr. Sadiq. Are you ready? He asked. The doctor nodded. Yes, and Kunle, he will speak when the time is right. Khalifa took a deep breath. Good, he said. Let them believe the lie a little longer. Back at the mansion, Aissatou lay awake, staring at the ceiling of a cheap guesthouse room she had rented for one night. Sleep would not come. Her heart felt heavy, but beneath the grief something else stirred. A sense of wrongness she couldn't explain, a question she couldn't silence. What if death had lied? The rain continued to fall, and somewhere between truth and performance, a coffin waited to be sealed. The day Khalifa Sidib's death was announced to the public, Lagos stopped pretending. News outlets broke the story before sunrise. Radio hosts lowered their voices. Television anchors wore solemn expressions. Social media filled with black and white photos of Khalifa smiling beside skyscrapers, ports, and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Visionary, philanthropist, self-made giant. By noon, condolences poured into the Sidibé mansion like a river that never dried. Inside the house, however, grief had a different sound. It sounded like champagne corks popping behind closed doors. Mariama Sidibé stood in the master bedroom staring at her reflection. Her eyes were dry, her posture perfect. She adjusted her headscarf, making sure it looked modest but expensive. This is it, she said quietly. Ibrahim leaned against the dresser, scrolling through his phone. The board is nervous, he replied. They want reassurance. They'll get it, Mariama said. After the funeral. Ibrahim smirked. I've already scheduled meetings. Mariama turned to him sharply. Not too fast. Let them mourn first, publicly. He shrugged. Either way, the old man is gone. The words hung in the air. Mariama nodded once. Gone. Downstairs, staff moved cautiously, unsure where loyalty now belonged. Some whispered prayers, others whispered plans. Mr. Joseph Mensah wasted no time. He called the kitchen staff together. There will be changes, he announced. We answer to Madame Mariama now. No one argued. Aissatou Cissé arrived back at the mansion that afternoon, not as a maid but as a dismissed employee collecting her final pay. She walked through the gates slowly, her heart heavy. The house felt unfamiliar already, louder, sharper, less human. At the security desk, a guard stopped her. Name Aissatou Cissé. He checked a list. You have 10 minutes. She nodded and moved on. In the kitchen, the cook avoided her eyes. In the hallway, cleaners whispered. You heard? She's finished. Poor girl. Issa too ignored them. She went straight to her room. It was exactly as she had left it, small, bare, quiet. She folded her clothes carefully as if order might steady her thoughts. Each item carried a memory: Khalifa's coat she once cleaned late at night, the cup she used to bring him tea, the scarf he complimented once softly when no one else was around. Her hands trembled. When she finished, she sat on the bed, clutching her suitcase. Something inside her refused to settle. She remembered his eyes in the hospital, the way his fingers tightened around hers, the words he had spoken. If I disappear, will you tell the truth? Her chest tightened. Outside her door, voices approached. I want everything cleared out today, Mariama was saying. No reminders. Yes, madam, Mr. Mensah replied. They passed without stopping. Issa too stood. She took one last look around the room and left. The funeral planning moved at lightning speed. A massive venue was booked. Imported flowers arrived by truckloads. Designers were flown in to manage seating, lighting, and broadcast angles. Every detail was curated. This must be unforgettable, Mariama told the planners. He deserves nothing less, she smiled as she said it. Zainab watched silently from the staircase. She hadn't slept since the announcement. Her eyes were red. Her hands shook constantly. Mother, she said softly that evening, do you really feel this calm? Mariama looked at her daughter with irritation. Calm is strength. Zainab swallowed. I feel empty. That's because you're young, Mariama replied. You'll understand one day. Zainab didn't respond. That night, Ibrahim hosted a small gathering in the study, close associates only. Glasses clinked, laughter slipped out, then stopped abruptly when someone mentioned Khalifa's name. To legacy, Ibrahim said, raising his glass. To the future, another man replied. Across town, far from the lights and speeches, Khalifa Sidibe watched the broadcast of his own death from a muted television. He stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Notice how quickly they move on, Dr. Sadiq said quietly. Khalifa nodded. They've been rehearsing for years. Barrister Kunle entered with a folder. They've already begun filing changes with the corporate registry, he said. Ibrahim listed himself as interim chairman. Khalifa exhaled slowly. Of course he did. Kunle hesitated. There's something else. Khalifa turned. Say it, the maid Kunle said. Issa too. Khalifa stiffened. What about her? She's been dismissed, Kunle replied. But she's also been excluded from the funeral. Khalifa's jaw tightened. She has the right to attend, he said. Kunle nodded. I know, but Mariama ordered otherwise. Khalifa turned back to the screen. On it, Mariama appeared before reporters, her voice trembling. My husband believed in people, she said. He believed in family. Khalifa closed his eyes. Make sure Isadu gets there, he said quietly. However you can. Kunle nodded. I will. The night before the funeral, the Sidib mansion was filled with rehearsals. Seating charts were reviewed. Speeches were timed. Security protocols were finalized. This must go smoothly, Mariama insisted. No surprises. Zainab watched from the shadows, her stomach twisting. She found Ibrahim later alone, scrolling through financial reports. Do you ever miss him? She asked suddenly. Ibrahim didn't look up. Miss who, father? He paused, then shrugged. He lived his life. Now it's our turn. Zainab stared at him, horrified. At dawn, Aisatu stood outside the cemetery gates. She had borrowed a simple black dress. Her hair was neatly covered. Her hands were clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Guards blocked her path. This event is invitation only, one of them said. Aisatu lifted her chin. I worked for him. The guard frowned. You're not on the list. She felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but she didn't move. I came to say goodbye, she said quietly. Behind her, a black car slowed. The window rolled down. Barrister Kunle leaned out. Let her through. The guards hesitated, then stepped aside. Aisatu entered the cemetery, her heart pounding. Rows of white chairs stretched endlessly. Flowers filled the air with a heavy, sweet scent. Cameras hovered like insects. She took a seat at the very back. As the service began, music played softly. A pastor spoke of legacy and eternal rest. Heads bowed. Aisatu stared at the coffin. Something was wrong. She couldn't explain it, but her chest tightened, her skin prickled. This didn't feel like goodbye. And as the words of prayer echoed across the ground, a single thought pressed harder and harder against her heart. He is not gone. The coffin sat at the center of the cemetery like a final verdict. Polished wood, gold handles, white roses arranged with obsessive care. Everything about it was designed to communicate one message to the world. Khalifa Sidibe is gone. Aissatou Cissé sat in the last row, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her body refused to accept what her eyes were being shown. Around her, grief performed itself loudly. Women wailed, men shook their heads solemnly. Cameras zoomed in on tears, capturing pain from flattering angles. Every sob felt timed, every silence felt rehearsed. At the front, Mariama Sidibe stood beside Ibrahim and Zainab. Mariama's face was composed, sorrow carefully measured. She dabbed her eyes at the right moments, leaned into Ibrahim when the cameras turned toward them, and whispered prayers just loud enough to be heard. Ibrahim looked grave but restless. His gaze drifted off into the crowd, to the press, to the dignitaries seated under the large white tent. Zainab stood slightly apart from them. Her eyes were swollen. Her lips trembled. Unlike the others, her grief had no rhythm. It came in waves, sharp, sudden, uncontrollable. She scanned the crowd until she spotted Aissatou. Their eyes met. For a brief second, Zainab felt something ease inside her chest. She's here, she thought. At least she's here. The pastor began to speak. He talked about Khalifa's rise from nothing, about his generosity, about his vision, about how death comes for all men, no matter how powerful. Aissatou listened, but the words slid past her. Her eyes never left the coffin. With every passing minute, the pressure inside her chest grew heavier. Her breathing became shallow. Her palms grew cold. This is wrong. Something inside her whispered. She remembered small details, things no one else would notice. Khalifa hated strong floral scents. He always joked about how coffins felt too tight, too final. He never liked being touched when he slept, and yet here he was, sealed, surrounded by perfume, claimed by death. A sudden memory hit her like a blow. The hospital room, his fingers tightening around hers, his voice weak but steady. Whatever happens next, do not doubt what you know. Her heart began to race. At the edge of the crowd, Mr. Joseph Mensah whispered to a security guard. "Keep an eye on her," he said, nodding toward Aissatou. "She doesn't belong here." The guard nodded. The pastor raised his hands. "Let us pray." Everyone bowed their heads. Everyone except Aissatou. Her eyes burned. Her ears rang. Her body felt as if it were standing at the edge of something dangerous and irreversible. The prayer ended. A choir began to sing softly. That was when it happened. Aissatou felt it. A deep, unmistakable certainty, not thought, not logic, but knowing. Her chest tightened so painfully she gasped. "No," she whispered to herself. "No. No." The sound of the choir faded into the background. The world narrowed until there was only her and the coffin. Her heart pounded louder than the drums. He is not dead. The realization slammed into her with terrifying clarity. She stood up. The movement caught attention immediately. People turned, cameras shifted, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Aissatou, a voice hissed from behind her, "Sit down." She didn't. Her legs trembled, but she took one step forward, then another. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. At the front, Mariama noticed the disturbance. Her eyes narrowed. "What is she doing?" she whispered sharply. Ibrahim followed her gaze and stiffened. "Security," Mariama said quietly. Two guards began moving toward Aissatou. Panic surged through her, but she didn't stop. Every instinct screamed at her to be silent, to disappear, to survive. But something stronger rose within her, stronger than fear. Truth. When she spoke, her voice tore through the air like glass shattering. "He's still alive?" Silence fell instantly. Not the soft silence of prayer, but the hard, stunned silence of disbelief. Dozens of faces snapped toward her. "What did she say? Did you hear that? Is she mad?" The guards froze mid-step. Mariama's face drained of color. Ibrahim's jaw clenched. Zainab gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Aissatou stood trembling, tears streaming down her face, but her voice did not waver this time. "He's still alive," she repeated. "I know it." Laughter broke out in pockets. Someone scoffed. "How dare she?" another voice shouted. "Remove her!" Mariama stepped forward, her expression furious. "This is inappropriate," she said loudly. "This woman is disturbed. She is seeking attention." Aissatou shook her head violently. "I'm not lying." "Security," Mariama snapped. "Get her out." The guards grabbed Aissatou by the arms. Pain shot through her shoulders, but she didn't stop speaking. "He asked me to tell the truth," she cried. "He said not to doubt what I know." People gasped. Cameras zoomed in. "What truth?" someone shouted. Ibrahim rushed forward. "She's a former employee," he said quickly. "She's unstable. Grief affects people differently." The guards dragged Aisatu toward the aisle. She struggled weakly. "Please," she cried, "please listen to me." Mariama leaned close to her, her voice low and venomous. "You foolish girl," she whispered. "Do you know what you're doing?" Aisatu met her eyes. "Yes," she said through tears. "I do." Mariama slapped her. The sound echoed across the cemetery. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Zainab screamed, "Mother!" The guards hesitated. Aisatu tasted blood, but she didn't fall. She straightened slowly, her face burning, her heart pounding. "He is not dead," she said again, quieter now, but stronger. "This coffin is a lie." The crowd erupted. Some shouted, some argued, some demanded answers. At that moment, Barrister Kunle Adebayo stepped forward. "Enough," he said firmly. His voice carried authority. The guards stopped. Mariama turned on him. "This is not your place." Kunle met her gaze calmly. "Actually, it is." He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "what you are witnessing is not madness." A ripple of confusion spread. Ibrahim stepped forward. "Kunle, don't do this." Kunle ignored him. "There are truths that only reveal themselves when lies grow too loud." Kunle continued. "And today, a lie has grown very loud." Mariama's hands began to shake. "What are you saying?" she demanded. Kunle looked at the coffin. "I'm saying," he said slowly, "that Khalifa Sidibe is not dead." The cemetery exploded into chaos. Voices rose. Cameras surged forward. People stood shouting, demanding explanations. Zainab collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Ibrahim backed away, his face pale. Mariama screamed, "This is a setup. He's lying." Kunle raised his hand. "Open the coffin," he said. The guards hesitated. Mariama shrieked, "You will not!" Kunle's voice hardened. "Open it, now!" A heavy pause followed. Then slowly the coffin lid began to lift. Aisatu held her breath. The roses shifted. The lid opened fully. The space inside was empty. For one terrifying second, the world stopped. Then a voice spoke from behind the crowd. "Please forgive the confusion." Everyone turned. A man stepped forward, alive. Khalifa Sidibe. The moment Khalifa Sidibe stepped into view, the cemetery collapsed into disbelief. Gasps rippled like a sudden wind through dry leaves. Phones slipped from trembling hands. A few people laughed, not from humor, but from shock so sharp the body didn't know how else to react. "No, that's impossible. Is this some kind of trick?" Khalifa raised one hand. The noise didn't stop immediately, but it softened like waves pulling back from shore. He looked thinner than before, his face paler, his hair more gray. But his eyes? Those eyes were unmistakable. Calm. Focused. Alive. "I apologize," he said evenly, "for the distress." Mariama staggered backward as if struck. Her mouth opened but no words came out. Her carefully constructed grief shattered in seconds, leaving behind naked fear. Ibrahim's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. This isn't real," he whispered. Zainab covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now, but these tears were different. These were tears of release. "Father," she breathed. Khalifa stepped closer to the front. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, final. Aisatu stood frozen where the guards had left her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. When Khalifa's eyes found hers, the world narrowed again. He nodded. Just once. She broke down. The crowd surged forward, but security intervened quickly, creating space around Khalifa. Mariama found her voice at last. "This is cruel," she screamed. "This is a cruel joke." Khalifa turned to her slowly. "Is it?" he asked quietly. She shook her head violently. "You let me mourn you. You let your family suffer." Khalifa's gaze didn't waver. "I let you reveal yourselves," he replied. Ibrahim stepped forward, panic flooding his voice. "Father, listen, whatever you think you saw, it's not what it looks like." Khalifa lifted a hand again. "Enough." The word fell like a verdict. Barrister Kunle Adebayo stepped beside him, holding a thick folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kunle announced, "for transparency and legal clarity, everything that follows is documented and verified. Khalifa gestured toward a large screen near the tent originally prepared for a memorial montage. Instead, files appeared. Bank statements, transfer records, signed authorizations, names, dates, amounts. A collective murmur grew louder with every slide. Mariama's face drained of blood. "No," she whispered. "This can't stop," Ibrahim said sharply, pointing at Kunle. "This is confidential." Kunle turned to him. It was. Until fraud made it public. Khalifa spoke again. "I asked one question before I disappeared," he said. "Who would stay by my side when power could no longer protect me?" His eyes moved deliberately across the crowd over associate staff partners. "Most of you left," he continued. "Some of you celebrated." A ripple of discomfort spread. "And one person," Khalifa said, turning at last to Aissatou, stood where no one else would. He walked toward her. The guards parted instinctively. Aissatou tried to speak, but no sound came. Tears blurred her vision. Khalifa stopped in front of her. "You told the truth," he said gently, "even when it cost you everything." She shook her head. I knew." The Khalifa replied, "His courage." The crowd watched in stunned silence. Mariama screamed again. "She manipulated you." Khalifa turned back sharply. "No," he said. "She reminded me who I was." He faced the crowd once more. "While I lay in that bed," Khalifa continued, "I listened. I learned. I watched how my illness became an opportunity." Ibrahim shook his head. "You're exaggerating." Khalifa met his son's eyes. "You accessed accounts you did not create," Khalifa said calmly. "You signed contracts you did not earn. You planned my burial before my breath had stopped." Ibrahim opened his mouth, then closed it. Mariama collapsed into a chair, shaking. "This was supposed to be ours," she whispered. Khalifa's expression hardened. "It was never yours," he said. "It was entrusted to you." Kunle stepped forward again. Effective immediately, he announced all transfers made during Khalifa Sidib's hospitalization are frozen. An internal investigation has been launched. Police officers at the edge of the cemetery began moving closer. Zainab stood slowly. "Father," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I didn't know. I swear." Khalifa turned to her and his expression softened. "I know," he said, "and that is why you still stand here." Mariama laughed suddenly, a brittle broken sound. "So that's it," she asked. "You humiliate us in front of the world." Khalifa looked at her steadily. "You humiliated yourselves," he said. "I simply stopped protecting the lie." Silence followed. Then a reporter shouted, "Mr. Sidibe, was this planned from the beginning?" Khalifa paused. "No," he said honestly. "It became necessary." Another voice called out, "What about the coffin?" Khalifa allowed a faint smile. Empty. Nervous laughter spread through the crowd. Aissatou wiped her tears, still struggling to stand. Khalifa noticed. He turned to Kunle. "Take care of her." Kunle nodded. As the authorities approached Mariama and Ibrahim, panic erupted. "You can't do this." Mariama screamed. "I am your wife." Khalifa's voice was quiet, but it carried. "You were," he said. Ibrahim tried to flee, but officers stopped him. Zainab sobbed openly, now torn between relief and devastation. The cameras captured everything. By nightfall, the story had already begun to spread faster than anyone could control. Billionaire fakes. Death to expose family betrayal. Maid reveals truth at funeral, power greed, and one woman's courage. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Khalifa remained standing near the coffin. Aissatou approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I caused trouble." Khalifa smiled sadly. "No," he said. "You ended it." He looked around the cemetery, the flowers, the chairs, the lies that had been laid to rest. "This was never meant to be a spectacle," he added. "But truth rarely arrives quietly." Aissatou nodded. Above them, the sky darkened as evening fell, and somewhere between the empty coffin and the shattered legacy, a new chapter had begun. By the time the cemetery emptied, night had already begun to fall over Lagos. The white chairs stood abandoned. Wilted flowers sagged under their own weight. The grand spectacle that Mariama Sidib had so carefully orchestrated dissolved into whispers, flashing headlines, and frantic phone calls. But the real reckoning had only just begun. Khalifa Sidib left the cemetery quietly, escorted by security. There were no speeches, no interviews, no explanations beyond what had already been revealed. He understood something very well. Now truth did not need decoration. It only needed time. Aissatou Cissé followed behind him, unsure where she belonged. She still felt lightheaded, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted permanently. Every few steps someone stared at her, some with curiosity, others with disbelief, a few with quiet respect. "The maid," they whispered. She was right. At the gate, Khalifa stopped. "Aissatou," he said gently. She froze. "Yes, sir?" "You are not dismissed," he said. "You never were." Her breath caught. I don't understand." "You will," he replied. "But not here." He gestured toward the waiting car. Kunle Adebayo stood nearby, speaking quietly into his phone, already arranging what came next. Across town, the Sidibe mansion was in chaos. Police vehicles lined the driveway. Lights flashed against the walls that once symbolized power and stability. Officers moved in and out, carrying boxes, sealing rooms, documenting evidence. Mariama sat on the edge of the grand staircase, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "This is a mistake," she muttered. "This is all a mistake." No one answered her. Ibrahim was in a different state entirely. He paced the living room, running his hands through his hair, his phone buzzing nonstop with messages from business partners who suddenly refused to answer calls or answered only to distance themselves. "Pick up?" He snapped at the screen. "Pick up?" No one did. Zainab stood in the doorway, watching her family unravel. She felt like she was standing in a house she no longer recognized. Every painting on the wall, every chandelier, every polished surface now felt like a lie she had lived inside for years. "Mother," she said softly. Mariama looked up, her eyes wild. "Don't talk to me." Zainab swallowed. "Father is alive." Mariama laughed hysterically. "Alive? That man is dead to me." Zainab flinched. "No," she said, finding a strength she didn't know she had. "He is alive, and you are afraid." Mariama's laughter stopped instantly. "Watch your mouth," she hissed. Zainab didn't back away. "You planned for him to die. You were relieved." Mariama stood abruptly, slapping Zainab across the face. The sound echoed through the hall. "You ungrateful child," Mariama screamed. "Everything I did was for this family." Zainab tasted blood. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't cry. "For yourself," she whispered. She turned and ran upstairs, locking herself in her room. At the private medical facility on the outskirts of the city, Khalifa sat alone in a quiet room, staring out the window. For the first time since his death, the adrenaline faded and exhaustion took its place. Dr. Sadiq Lawal entered, checking his vitals. "You did well today," the doctor said. Khalifa smiled faintly. "I survived." Dr. Sadiq hesitated. "Not everyone will forgive you for how you did it." Khalifa nodded. "I didn't do it to be forgiven." A knock sounded on the door. Kunle entered, his expression serious but controlled. "They're moving fast," he said. "Accounts are frozen. Ibrahim is being questioned. Mariama's assets are under review." Khalifa closed his eyes briefly, and Aissatou Kunle glanced toward the hallway where Aissatou sat quietly, her hands folded. "She's overwhelmed," he said. "But safe." Khalifa stood slowly. "Bring her in." When Aissatou entered the room, she hesitated near the doorway. "I don't want to cause more trouble," she said quietly. Khalifa looked at her with something close to sadness. "You didn't cause it," he replied. "You survived it." She shook her head. "Everyone is looking at me now. I don't know how to be this person." "You don't need to be anyone else," Khalifa said. "Just stay who you are." She stared at the floor. "They slapped me. They dragged me. I thought I would disappear." "You didn't," Khalifa said firmly. "Because you spoke." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Aissatou whispered, "Why me?" Khalifa considered the question carefully. "Because when power left the room," he said, "you stayed." Her eyes filled with tears again. That night, Lagos buzzed with rumors. Some praised Khalifa as a genius. Others condemned him as cruel. Religious leaders debated morality. Social commentators argued over ethics. Everyone had an opinion. But no one could deny one thing. The Sidib name would never mean the same thing again. At dawn, Khalifa returned not to the mansion, but to a smaller, older house he had once owned before wealth had swallowed his life. It was modest, quiet, honest. Aissatou stood at the gate, unsure whether to step inside. "You can stay here," Khalifa said. "For now." "For how long?" she asked. "As long as you need." Inside the house smelled like dust and memory. Old photographs lined the walls, Khalifa as a younger man smiling beside projects that had once meant something more than profit. "This is where I began," he said, "before everything became complicated." Aissatou nodded slowly. Back at the mansion, officers escorted Mariama Sidib out in silence. She kept her head high, refusing to look at anyone, but her eyes darted everywhere, searching for escape. Ibrahim was led out separately, his confidence gone, replaced by raw panic. As he passed reporters, someone shouted, "Was it worth it?" He didn't answer. Zainab watched from an upstairs window as the house emptied. She felt relief and grief twisted together inside her chest. Later that evening, she found herself standing outside the old house where Khalifa now stayed. She hesitated before knocking. Khalifa opened the door himself. "Father," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Inside, Zainab broke down. "I didn't know," she cried. "I swear I didn't know." Khalifa held her silently. "I know," he said, "but knowing late still has consequences." She nodded through tears. "I want to do better," she said. "I want to learn." Khalifa glanced toward the kitchen where Aissatou was quietly preparing tea. "Then start by learning from her," he said. Zainab followed his gaze. For the first time, she truly saw Aissatou not as a servant, not as a shadow, but as a woman whose quiet courage had shifted an empire. Outside, the city continued its restless movement. But inside that small house, something fragile and new began to take shape. Not forgiveness, not yet, but truth. Morning arrived quietly at the small house on the outskirts of Lagos. No sirens, no reporters, no rehearsed condolences, just sunlight filtering through thin curtains and the soft clink of a kettle in the kitchen. Aissatou Cissé moved carefully, still unsure of her place. She prepared tea the way she always had, precise, unhurried, respectful. Old habits didn't disappear overnight, especially when they had once been armor. Khalifa Sidibé sat at the small dining table reading through documents Kunle had left the night before. His face looked tired now, not the dramatic fatigue of illness, but the deep weariness of a man who had watched his life crack open. Zainab sat across from him, silent. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the coffin, the empty space, her mother's face, her brother's panic, and Aissatou standing alone, bleeding, telling the truth when no one else would. Aissatou placed the tea on the table and stepped back instinctively. "Sit," Khalifa said gently. She hesitated. Zainab looked up. "Please." Slowly, Aissatou took a seat. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Zainab broke the silence. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said quietly. "Everything I believed about my family, it feels like it was built on sand." Khalifa nodded. "That's because it was." Zainab swallowed. "Why didn't I see it? Because comfort makes us blind," Khalifa replied, "and fear keeps us silent." Zainab's eyes drifted to Aissatou. "You weren't blind," she said softly. Aissatou shook her head. "I was afraid," she admitted, "every day. But you spoke," Zainab said. Aissatou looked down. "Because I had nothing left to lose." Khalifa closed the folder in front of him. "That," he said, "is the most dangerous kind of honesty." Later that morning, Kunle arrived with updates. "Ibrahim has been formally charged," he said. "Financial crimes, fraud, conspiracy." Khalifa didn't react, and Mariama Zainab asked. Kunle hesitated. "Her lawyers are fighting hard, but her reputation is already collapsing." Zainab lowered her head. Khalifa leaned back slowly. "Let the law do what it must." Kunle nodded. "There's one more thing." He turned to Aissatou. "The media wants to speak with you," he said. "They're calling you a hero." Aissatou stiffened. "I don't want that." "I know," Kunle said gently, "but attention will follow whether you invite it or not." Khalifa studied her carefully. "You don't owe anyone a performance," he said, "but silence is also a message." Aissatou looked torn. "I don't want revenge." "Neither do I," Khalifa replied. "This isn't about revenge, it's about repair." That afternoon, Aissatou agreed to speak once, not on television, not on a stage, but in a quiet written statement released through Kunle. Her words were simple. She spoke about truth, about dignity, about how fear grows when good people stay silent. She did not insult Mariama. She did not accuse Ibrahim. She did not glorify Khalifa. She spoke only of what she knew. By evening, the statement had gone viral. People didn't argue with it. They felt it. Across Lagos and far beyond, people saw themselves in her words. Cleaners, drivers, nurses, security guards, women whose voices had been ignored, men who had been taught that silence was survival. For the first time, Aissatou felt something unfamiliar. Respect. Back at the mansion, the walls echoed with emptiness. Furniture was covered, doors sealed. The house that once pulsed with power now felt like a museum to a life that no longer existed. Mariama sat alone in a temporary holding room, her face pale, her hands trembling. She replayed the funeral in her mind again and again. Aissatou's voice, the slap, the empty coffin. Ungrateful, she whispered to herself, all of them, but the words no longer convinced even her. In another room, Ibrahim stared at the floor, shackled. His phone was gone. His influence vanished. For the first time in his life, there was no shortcut, no connection, no inheritance to hide behind. That night, Khalifa walked outside the small house alone. The air was cooler. The city hummed softly in the distance. He thought of everything he had built and everything he had neglected: power, legacy, family. He had believed success would protect them. Instead, it had exposed them. Footsteps approached. Aissatou stood a few feet away, hesitant. "Sir," she said, "may I ask you something?" He turned to her. "Of course. After all this, what happens to me?" Khalifa considered the question carefully. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "I've never been asked that." "Then it's time," he said. Aissatou thought for a long moment. "I want to work," she said slowly, "but not in silence anymore." Khalifa nodded. "Then you will." The next day, Khalifa made a public announcement, not from a podium, not with applause, from a simple press release. He announced the restructuring of Sidibe Group. He announced the creation of a foundation focused on worker protection, ethical employment, and education for domestic workers and low-income women. And he announced who would help lead it: Aissatou Tissi. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Some praised the decision as visionary. Others called it reckless. A few accused Khalifa of sentimentality. Khalifa ignored them all. That evening, Zainab sat with Aissatou on the front steps. "I'm scared?" Zainab admitted. "So am I," Aissatou replied. Zainab smiled faintly. "You don't look like it." Aissatou looked at her hands. "Bravery doesn't mean fear disappears. It means you move anyway." Zainab nodded slowly. "I want to learn from you," she said. Aissatou met her gaze. "Then we will learn together." Inside the house, Khalifa listened to their voices through the open window. For the first time in a long while, the sound didn't feel like loss. It felt like beginning. But the past was not finished. The law moved slowly. Public opinion shifted unpredictably, and Mariama Sidibe was not a woman who accepted downfall quietly. As night fell, Khalifa stared at the city lights. The lie had been exposed, but consequences were only just catching up. The backlash arrived faster than anyone expected. By the third morning after Khalifa Sidib's reappearance, the tone of public conversation began to shift. What had started as awe slowly twisted into suspicion. Praise made room for questions. Questions sharpened into accusations. He humiliated his own family. He used death as a weapon. And now he hands power to a Maid. Television panels debated morality. Radio hosts argued about tradition. Social media split itself into camps, those who saw justice and those who saw chaos. Khalifa listened to none of it directly. He had learned long ago that noise multiplied when truth unsettled comfort. Instead, he focused on what could not be argued: facts, law, and accountability. Kunle arrived early that morning with grim updates. Mariama's legal team is pushing a new narrative, he said. They're claiming emotional abuse, manipulation. They're painting you as calculating and cruel. Khalifa nodded. Expected. And Ibrahim Kunle continued, has started talking. He's trying to bargain. Khalifa's expression tightened. Talking about what? About everything, Kunle said quietly, including people you once trusted. Khalifa exhaled slowly. Then let the truth finish its work, he said. In another part of the city, Mariama Sidib stared at herself in a mirror she barely recognized. Her once perfect posture had collapsed. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her hands shook as she adjusted her scarf, no longer a symbol of elegance, but of damage control. "They've turned me into a monster," she hissed to her lawyer. The lawyer avoided her gaze. "Public opinion is unstable. You need to appear remorseful." Mariama laughed bitterly. "Remorse? For what? For surviving?" "For looking guilty," the lawyer corrected. Mariama's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story." Her heart skipped. She stared at the screen, then typed back quickly. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. The message never came. At the small house, Aisatu felt the pressure closing in from a different direction. People recognized her now, at the market, on the street, even at the gate. Some smiled, others whispered. A few looked at her with resentment she didn't understand. She thinks she's important now. She betrayed her employers. Women like her should know their place. The words stung more than she expected. That evening she broke down quietly in the kitchen. "I didn't want this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I just wanted the truth to be heard." Zainab stood beside her, helpless. "They're afraid," she said softly. "You showed them something they didn't want to see." Aisatu wiped her tears. "What if I wasn't strong enough?" Zainab shook her head. "You already were." Khalifa watched them from the doorway. He saw something then, something he had ignored most of his life. Courage did not end when the truth was spoken. It began there. The following day, Khalifa made a decision that shocked even Kunle. "I want Mariama to see me," Khalifa said calmly. Kunle stiffened. "That's not advisable." "I know," Khalifa replied, "but it's necessary." Within hours, arrangements were made. Mariama arrived at the old house late that afternoon, escorted by security. She stepped out of the car slowly, her head high, but her eyes darted nervously. Khalifa met her at the door. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. "You look well," Mariama said stiffly. "You look afraid," Khalifa replied. Her jaw tightened. "You destroyed everything." "No," he said quietly. "I stopped pretending." She stepped inside, glancing around with disdain. "This is where you hide." "Now." "I'm not hiding," Khalifa said. "I'm choosing." Mariama laughed bitterly. "And you chose her." Aisatu stood frozen in the hallway. Khalifa didn't turn. "I chose truth." Mariama's eyes burned as they locked onto Aisatu. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You think speaking one sentence made you powerful?" Aisatu swallowed hard, but she didn't step back. "I didn't speak to win," she said softly. "I spoke because I couldn't lie anymore." Mariama scoffed. "You enjoyed humiliating us." Aisatu shook her head. "I was humiliated long before that day." Silence fell. Khalifa finally spoke again. "I invited you here," he said to Mariama, "not to punish you, but to end this." Mariama stared at him. "End what?" "The lies," he replied. "Between us, between you and yourself." Her composure cracked. "You used me," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. "All those years, I stood by you. I built this family. You guarded the image," Khalifa said, "not the values." Mariama's eyes filled with tears, but whether they were real or not, no one could tell anymore. "You chose money over me," she whispered. Khalifa shook his head slowly. "You chose money over us." Mariama turned away, her shoulders shaking. For a brief second, Aisatu felt sympathy, dangerous, unwanted sympathy. But then Mariama spoke again. "I won't go down alone," she said quietly. Khalifa stiffened. "What do you mean?" Mariama turned back, her eyes cold. "There are things you don't know," she said, "and people who won't protect you anymore." Kunle stepped forward. "This conversation is over." Mariama smiled thinly. "You think so?" She left without another word. That night, Kunle worked late cross-checking documents Ibrahim had turned over. What he found made his blood run cold. Hidden accounts, offshore connections, and names Khalifa hadn't heard in years. "This is bigger than family betrayal," Kunle said gravely the next morning. "This touches parts of your business you thought were clean." Khalifa closed his eyes. "How deep?" he asked. "Deep enough," Kunle replied, "to bring everything down." Zainab listened from the doorway, fear tightening her chest. "What happens now?" she asked. Khalifa opened his eyes slowly. "Now," he said, "we finish what truth started." Outside, Aisatu stood alone, staring at the street. For the first time since the funeral, doubt crept in. Had she done the right thing? She remembered the slap, the blood, the shouting, and then she remembered Khalifa's nod. Her chest steadied. Some truths burned before they healed. As sirens echoed faintly in the distance, somewhere someone was being arrested. Aisatu realized something else. This story was no longer about a funeral. It was about consequences, and they had only just begun. The arrests began before sunrise. Unmarked vehicles rolled quietly through the city, stopping outside offices that had once felt untouchable. Doors opened, names were called, papers were presented. Men who had spoken with confidence just days earlier were now silent, blinking under harsh lights. Ibrahim Sidibe was taken first. He did not resist. He did not shout. He simply stared ahead as officers placed him in the back seat, his hands shaking despite his effort to control them. Reporters caught a single image of his face through the window, empty, stunned, stripped of certainty. Mariama Sidibe was next. She arrived at the station wrapped in a dark scarf, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Cameras followed her every step. She said nothing. Her silence was louder than any denial. Across the city, the Sidibe name cracked open like old paint, revealing layers no one had wanted to see. At the small house, Khalifa Sidibe watched the news without sound. Zainab stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself. Aissatou sat quietly on the couch, her hands folded, her posture careful still, uncertain whether she was allowed to take up space in moments like this. Kunle Adebayo paced slowly. "The investigation has widened," he said. "Ibrahim gave them more than we expected." Khalifa nodded. "Fear loosens tongues." And Mariama Zainab asked. Kunle exhaled. "She's denying everything." "But the documents don't lie." Zainab lowered her head. Khalifa turned to her. "You don't need to carry their sins." She nodded, but the weight didn't lift. Later that afternoon, Khalifa requested something unexpected. "I want the staff to come," he said. Kunle blinked. "Which staff?" "All of them," Khalifa replied. From the mansion, that evening a group gathered hesitantly in the old house's courtyard. Drivers, cleaners, cooks, security guards, people who had spent years lowering their eyes. They stood uncertainly, whispering to one another. Khalifa stepped forward. "I called you here," he said, "to say what I should have said long ago." They listened, stunned. "I built an empire," Khalifa continued, "and I let it teach me silence. I let comfort blind me to cruelty happening in my own house." His gaze moved to Aissatou. "When I lost my strength," he said, "most people waited for my power to return. One person stayed without it." A murmur rippled through the group. Khalifa took a breath. "No one will be punished for telling the truth," he said, "and no one will be protected for hiding lies." He gestured to Kunle. Effective immediately, Kunle announced all staff dismissed during Khalifa Sidibe's hospitalization will be reinstated with compensation. Gasps broke out. Aissatou closed her eyes. Khalifa looked at her again, and Aissatou Sissa, he said, will serve as Director of Community Ethics for the Sidibe Foundation. The courtyard went silent. Aissatou stood abruptly. "Sarai," Khalifa raised a hand. "Not because you are perfect," he said, "but because you are honest." Her voice trembled. "I've never led anyone." "You led the truth," Khalifa replied. "That's enough to begin." Applause started, hesitant at first, then growing. Aissatou felt her knees weaken. Zainab reached for her hand. That night, Aissatou couldn't sleep. She sat outside, staring at the stars, listening to the city breathe. Zainab joined her quietly. "Do you regret it?" Zainab asked. Aissatou shook her head slowly. "I regret the pain, not the truth." Zainab nodded. "I wish I had been braver." Aissatou looked at her. "You still can be." The following day, Khalifa faced the cameras on his own terms. No stage, no banners, just a simple statement. "I'm not proud of how this story became public," he said, "but I am responsible for what it revealed." He spoke about accountability, about power, about the cost of silence. And he spoke about Aissatou without naming her suffering, without turning her into a symbol. "She did not shout for attention," Khalifa said. "She spoke because she could not lie anymore." The reaction was different this time. Quieter, heavier, more reflective. By the end of the week, the Sidibe Foundation received its first wave of applications from domestic workers, from widows, from people who had never believed help would reach them. Aissatou reviewed each one carefully. She worked late, learning systems she had never touched before. She asked questions without shame. She listened more than she spoke. And slowly, confidence replaced fear. At the detention facility, Mariama sat alone, staring at the wall. Her lawyer had stopped promising miracles. Friends had stopped calling. She thought of the slap, of the coffin, of the empty space where certainty used to be. For the first time, there was no audience. Only consequences. One afternoon, a guard approached her cell. "You have a visitor," he said. Mariama looked up, startled. Khalifa stood outside the bars. For a long moment, neither spoke. You didn't come to gloat, Mariama said finally. No, Khalifa replied. She laughed weakly. Then why? To tell you the truth, he said. One last time. She swallowed. Go on. You weren't always this person, Khalifa said, but you chose to protect the lie longer than you protected us. Tears slid down Mariama's cheeks. I was afraid. So was I. Khalifa replied. But fear doesn't excuse harm. She looked away. I don't forgive you, Khalifa said gently, and you don't need my forgiveness to face justice. He turned to leave. Khalifa, she whispered. What about her? He paused. She stood where you wouldn't, he said. That's all. As he walked away, Mariama pressed her forehead against the bars, finally alone with herself. Back at the house, Aissatou signed her name on an official document for the first time. Her hand shook, but the letters were clear. Khalifa watched quietly from across the room. You did well today, he said. Aissatou smiled faintly. I'm still afraid. So am I, he replied. That's how I know we're paying attention. Zainab entered holding a letter. It's from one of the women, she said. She said she felt seen. Aissatou closed her eyes. Seen. The word settled gently like a promise. Outside, the city continued to move forward, imperfect, noisy, alive. The lie had collapsed, the truth had spoken, and now something harder and more important was happening. Repair. The trial did not begin with shouting. It began with silence, a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls of the courtroom, against the rows of wooden benches filled with journalists, observers, and people who had once believed the Sidib name was untouchable. Khalifa Sidib sat near the front, composed, his hands folded loosely in his lap. He didn't wear a suit that screamed power. He wore something simple, clean, neutral, unremarkable. The kind of clothing a man chose when he no longer needed to prove who he was. Aissatou Cissé sat several rows behind him beside Zainab. She had never been inside a courtroom before. The air smelled like paper and tension. Every sound felt amplified, the shuffle of feet, the cough of a spectator, the soft click of a pen. She kept her gaze forward, reminding herself to breathe. Zainab leaned toward her. You don't have to look, she whispered. Aissatou shook her head. I do. At the defense table, Ibrahim Sidibé stared at the surface of the desk as if it might open and swallow him. His shoulders were slumped now. Gone was the arrogance, the certainty, the belief that money could bend consequences. Mariama sat several feet away from him. She did not look at Khalifa. She did not look at Aissatou. She stared straight ahead, her face composed in a way that fooled no one. The prosecutor stood. Today, she began. We are not here to judge success or wealth. We are here to judge choices. Files were presented, records projected, witnesses called. Each piece of evidence peeled away another layer of the lie. Ibrahim's forged signatures, Mariama's coordinated transfers, emails written with confidence assuming no one would ever question them. When the prosecutor called Aissatou's name, a murmur rippled through the room. She stood slowly. Her legs felt weak, but she walked forward anyway. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She told the truth exactly as she remembered it. What she heard, what she saw, what she felt. She spoke of invisibility, of silence mistaken for consent, of a moment when the truth became heavier than fear. When she finished, the room was quiet. The defense tried to discredit her. She is not an accountant. She is not educated in finance. She is emotionally involved. Aissatou listened without reacting. When asked if she had anything to add, she spoke calmly. I didn't understand the numbers, she said, but I understood intent. Something shifted then, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. At the end of the day, Khalifa was called to the stand. He did not defend his deception. I take responsibility, he said, for how far things went before I acted. The judge studied him carefully. And why did you fake your death, she asked. Khalifa paused. Because power had made me unreachable, he said, and I needed to hear the truth when no one was afraid of me. The courtroom held its breath. The verdict did not come that day, but when it did weeks later, it was decisive. Ibrahim was sentenced. Mariama was found guilty of conspiracy and fraud. The Sidib empire was dismantled and rebuilt piece by piece under oversight, not destroyed, corrected. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Khalifa. Do you feel vindicated? Someone shouted. Khalifa shook his head. I feel responsible, another voice called out. And the maid. Khalifa turned. She is not the maid. he said evenly. She is a leader. Aissatou stood behind him, stunned. That night, the small house filled with quiet celebration. Not champagne, not speeches, just food shared at the table, laughter that felt cautious but real, a sense that something painful had finally loosened its grip. Zainab raised a glass of water. To courage, she said. Aissatou smiled shyly. To honesty. Khalifa nodded. To beginnings. Later, when the house grew quiet, Aissatou sat alone with Khalifa on the porch. Do you ever wish you hadn't done it? She asked. The funeral, the lie. Khalifa considered the question for a long time. I wish I had acted sooner, he said, but I don't regret stopping. She nodded. People think you saved me. Khalifa looked at her. You saved yourself. In the months that followed, the foundation grew, slowly, carefully. Aissatou visited shelters, training centers, homes where women worked quietly and feared loudly. She listened, she learned, she made mistakes and corrected them. She no longer lowered her eyes when she spoke. Zainab worked beside her, learning humility in ways wealth had never taught. Khalifa stepped back from daily control, choosing mentorship over command. And Mariama. She served her sentence. No interviews, no excuses, just time. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Aissatou. It was short, no apology, no justification. Only a single line. I finally understand what it means to be unheard. Aissatou folded the letter carefully and placed it away. Understanding, she had learned, did not always arrive in time, but when it did, it mattered. As the sun set over Lagos, Aissatou stood on the balcony of the foundation's modest office, watching the city pulse with life. She thought of the coffin, the shout, the moment fear lost its grip. Truth had not been gentle, but it had been necessary, and because of it, a different future had begun to take shape, one built not on silence but on voice. The sentence did not bring relief. It brought quiet, a quiet so unfamiliar that it took weeks for Aissatou Cissé to understand it was not emptiness, it was space. Space where fear no longer dictated her breath, space where her voice no longer had to fight to be heard. Outside the courthouse, life rushed forward as if nothing monumental had happened. Traffic honked, vendors shouted, the city absorbed the verdict and moved on the way cities always do. But for the people at the center of the storm, nothing was the same. Khalifa Siddiq returned to the small house and sat alone for a long time that evening. He did not turn on the lights. He didn't call anyone. He sat with the weight of what had been lost and what had been corrected. Power, he had learned, was not reclaimed by force. It was reshaped by responsibility. Across town, the Siddiq mansion stood silent behind locked gates, curtains drawn, garden overgrown. A place once filled with voices now reduced to echoes. It was scheduled to be sold, its proceeds redirected into restitution funds overseen by the court. Zainab visited the mansion one last time before the keys were handed over. She walked through rooms that had raised her, rooms that had taught her how to perform wealth, but not how to protect truth. In the master bedroom, she stood still, remembering her mother's reflection in the mirror, her brother's laughter in the hall. She felt sadness, but she did not feel regret. That night, she returned to the small house and knocked softly on Aissatou's door. I'm leaving tomorrow, Zainab said. Aissatou looked up, surprised. Leaving where? There's a training program in Ibadan, Zainab replied. Community development, ethical leadership. I applied months ago before everything ended. Aissatou smiled gently. That's good. Zainab hesitated. I don't want to disappear. You won't, Aissatou said. You're choosing to become. They hugged briefly, awkwardly, honestly. In the weeks that followed, the Sidibé Foundation shifted from concept to action. Aissatou moved into her office, a modest room with a desk, 2 chairs, and a whiteboard that still smelled new. On the wall, she taped handwritten notes. Listen first. Dignity before policy. No voice is small. Her days filled with meetings she once would have been excluded from. Government officials, NGOs, community leaders. She asked questions without apology and admitted when she didn't know the answer. Some people underestimated her. Others tested her. A few resented her. She faced all of it the same way she had faced the coffin, standing. One afternoon, a woman arrived with her children, trembling as she spoke. They say I should be grateful, the woman whispered, but they don't pay me. They keep my ID. Aissatou listened. She didn't interrupt. When the woman finished, Aissatou nodded and said, You are not wrong for wanting safety. It was a sentence Aissatou had once needed to hear herself. Behind the scenes, Khalifa worked quietly with Kunle to restructure the company remnants. Contracts were rewritten, oversight installed, profits capped and redirected, leadership decentralized. People will say you're dismantling your own legacy, Kunle warned. Khalifa nodded. Good. Legacies that can't survive accountability shouldn't survive at all. Public interest slowly faded. The story moved off front pages and into documentaries. Opinion softened into reflection. But in places where power once whispered threats, something else began to whisper back. Courage. In detention, Mariama Sidibe marked time by the sound of doors. She no longer wore silk, no longer performed grief, no longer commanded a room with posture alone. Her days were measured in hours, not applause. She received letters, some hateful, some sympathetic, some silent in their disappointment. She read them all. But there was one letter she reread more than the rest, the one from Aissatou. It had arrived weeks earlier, short, simple. I hope you find peace where truth no longer has to be hidden. Mariama had scoffed at first. Then she cried. And then much later she began to write a reply. She never sent it. Some understandings she realized were not meant to be delivered. They were meant to be lived with. Months passed. The foundation hosted its first public forum. No stage, no banners. Just chairs arranged in a circle under an open tent. Women spoke, men listened. Stories unfolded without interruption. Aissatou stood back watching. Khalifa stood beside her. You did this, he said quietly. Aissatou shook her head. They did. Khalifa smiled. You gave them permission. She looked at him. You trusted me. I learned, he replied. Too late for some things, but not for this. As the sun dipped low, a young girl approached Aissatou holding a notebook. Can you sign this? The girl asked shyly. Aissatou hesitated. Why? My teacher says you showed us how to speak, the girl said, even when our voices shake. Aissatou took the notebook. Her signature came easily now. That evening, as lights flickered on across the city, Khalifa sat alone again. But this time the quiet felt earned. He thought of the man he had been, the coffin he had arranged, the lie he had told to expose a deeper one. He did not glorify it, but he did not deny it either. Some truths he knew required disruption. Aissatou joined him on the porch. They asked me today if I was afraid, she said. Khalifa looked at her. And what did you say? I said yes, she replied. But fear doesn't get to decide anymore. Khalifa nodded. Then you're ready for whatever comes next. The city hummed. The night deepened. Somewhere a woman slept without fear for the first time in years. Somewhere a man reconsidered his silence. Somewhere a child learned that truth could belong to them too. The storm had passed, not because it was defeated, but because it had been faced. The final chapter did not announce itself. It arrived quietly like dawn. A year after the funeral that never was, Lagos had almost forgotten the scandal. New headlines had replaced old ones, new villains, new heroes. The city has always kept moving. But for those whose lives had been reshaped by that single moment of truth, memory did not fade so easily. The Sidibe Foundation's office no longer felt temporary. The walls were filled now, not with portraits of donors, but with photographs of people, women completing training programs, families moving into safe housing, children holding certificates with shy smiles. The air buzzed with purpose. Aissatou Cissé walked through the halls with steady confidence. She no longer flinched when doors opened behind her. She no longer lowered her voice in meetings. She still listened more than she spoke, but when she spoke, people leaned in. She had learned something important over the past year. Leadership did not require loudness. It required presence. That morning, Aissatou stood before a small group of new staff members. We are not here to save anyone, she told them calmly. We are here to stand beside them. They nodded, scribbling notes. Power should never be used to silence, she continued. If someone is afraid to speak to you, you are already doing harm. After the meeting, she stepped outside into the courtyard. Khalifa Sidibe was waiting. He looked different now, not weaker but lighter. He no longer carried urgency in his shoulders or command in his walk. He wore simplicity the way he once wore authority. You were good in there, he said. Aissatou smiled faintly. I'm still learning. So am I, Khalifa replied. They sat together under the shade of a tree that had been planted on the foundation's opening day. Its leaves were broader now, its roots deeper. You could have taken everything back, Aissatou said suddenly. After the trial, After the attention faded, Khalifa nodded. I thought about it, and she asked, and then I remembered the coffin, he said quietly, and how empty it was. She understood. That afternoon, Zainab Sidibe arrived unexpectedly. She looked thinner, stronger, more grounded. The softness of privilege had been replaced with something earned. I finished the program, she announced, smiling. They're sending me to a rural project next month. Aissatou hugged her. I'm proud of you. Zainab hesitated. I wanted to ask, may I stay connected to the foundation? Khalifa nodded before Aissatou could answer. You already are. Zainab exhaled, relieved. As the sun lowered, preparations began for a small gathering. Not a celebration, a reflection. Staff members, partners, and a few community representatives gathered in the courtyard. No stage, no microphones, just chairs in a circle. Khalifa stood briefly. A year ago, he said, I believed control was protection. I was wrong. He gestured toward Aissatou. This woman did not inherit power, he continued. She revealed truth. And truth changed everything. Aissatou felt the familiar warmth of attention, but it no longer frightened her. Khalifa stepped back. She stood. I didn't plan to speak that day, Aissatou said. I planned to survive it. Soft laughter moved through the group, but I learned something important, she continued. Silence protects harm. Voice protects people. She paused, letting the words settle. When you speak the truth, you may lose safety, she said, but you gain yourself. The group sat quietly, absorbing it. As dusk fell, candles were lit not in mourning, but in intention. Each person was invited to share one thing they were letting go of: fear, shame, silence, complicity. When it was Khalifa's turn, he spoke simply. I let go of the idea that power makes me right. When it was Aissatou's turn, she said only one word: invisibility. Later that night, when the courtyard emptied and the city lights shimmered beyond the walls, Aissatou remained seated, watching the candles burn low. Khalifa joined her. Do you ever wish you hadn't shouted? He asked gently. She thought for a long moment. No, she said, but I wish the world didn't need shouting to listen. Khalifa nodded. That is our work now. In the weeks that followed, the foundation expanded slowly and deliberately. No shortcuts, no performances, just presence. Aissatou traveled sometimes to places where people had never heard her name, sometimes to places where they knew it too well. She spoke when needed. She listened always. And every time doubt crept in, she remembered the moment she stood alone at the funeral, how fear had trembled, how truth had stood taller. One evening, a letter arrived at the foundation, no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten. I don't know how to undo what I did, but I see now what I refused to see then. I hope the quiet teaches me what power never did. Aissatou folded the letter gently. She did not cry. Understanding she had learned did not require forgiveness to matter. On the anniversary of the funeral, Khalifa and Aissatou returned to the cemetery. No cameras, no flowers, just the two of them standing before an unmarked spot where a lie had once been buried. Thank you, Khalifa said. Aissatou shook her head. We did this together. As they walked away, the wind moved through the grass softly. There was no coffin, no shouting, only truth still standing. Sometimes life doesn't change because power speaks. Sometimes life changes because someone who was never meant to speak finally does. This story reminds us that truth is not owned by the powerful. It often lives quietly with the ignored, the underestimated, the invisible. And when that truth finally rises, it doesn't just expose lies, it rearranges destinies. Khalifa had wealth, authority, and influence, yet it took losing all of that, even temporarily, for him to see what truly mattered. Aissatou had nothing the world respects, no title, no money, no protection, yet she carried the one thing that changed everything: courage rooted in integrity. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Silence may feel safe, but it slowly erases who we are. Speaking the truth may cost us comfort, reputation, even security, but it gives us something far greater: self-respect and impact. Every society moves forward, not because the powerful become kinder, but because ordinary people refuse to stay quiet in the face of injustice. So ask yourself, if you were standing there, would you have stayed silent, or would you have found the strength to speak even if your voice was shaking? If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere someone needs this reminder today, truth still has power.